Lauren raised a hand, gesturing to a passing student. A sandy-haired boy pulled up short and approached nervously. Radiating deference, he made a nod that was almost like a bow to the Master Archivist.
Yes, Master Lauren?
Lauren gestured to me with one of his long hands. Simon, this is Quoth. He needs to be shown about, signed to classes and the like. Kilvin wants him in artificing. Trust to your judgment otherwise. Will you tend to it? Simon nodded again and brushed his hair out of his eyes.
Yes, sir.
Without another word, Lauren turned and walked away, his long strides making his black master's robes billow out behind him. Simon was young for a student, though still a couple of years my senior. He stood taller than me, but his face was still boyish, his manner boyishly shy. "Do you have somewhere to stay yet?" he asked as we started to walk. "Room at an inn, or anything?" I shook my head. "I just got in today. I haven't thought much further than getting through admissions." Simon chuckled. "Ha, I know what that's like. I still get sweaty at the beginning of each term." He pointed to the left, down a wide lane lined with trees. "Let's head to the Mews first, then." I stopped walking. "I don't have a lot of money," I admitted. I hadn't planned on getting a room. I was used to sleeping outside, and I knew I would need to save my 3 talents for clothes, food, paper, and next term's tuition. I couldn't count on the master's generosity 2 terms in a row. "Admissions didn't go that well, huh?" Simon said sympathetically as he took my elbow and steered me towards another one of the grey university buildings. This one was 3 stories tall, many-windowed, and had several wings radiating out from a central hub. "Don't feel bad about it. I got nervous and pissed myself the first time through, figuratively." "I didn't do that badly," I said, suddenly very conscious of the 3 talents in my purse. "But I think I offended Master Lauren. He seemed a little chilly?" Simon asked. "Distant? Like an unblinking pillar of stone?" He laughed. "Lauren is always like that. Rumour has it that Elxadal has a standing offer of 10 gold marks to anyone who can make him laugh." "Oh," I relaxed a little. "That's good. He's the last person I'd want to get on the wrong side of. I'm looking forward to spending a lot of time in the archives. Just handle the books gently, and you'll get along fine. He's pretty detached for the most part, but be careful around his books." He raised his eyebrows and shook his head. "He's fiercer than a mother bear protecting her cubs. In fact, I'd rather get caught by a mother bear than have Lauren see me folding back a page." Simon kicked at a rock, sending it skipping down the cobblestones. "Okay, you've got options in the Mews. A talent will get you a bunk and a meal chit for the term," he shrugged. "Nothing fancy, but it keeps the rain off. You can share a room for 2 talents or get one all to yourself for 3. "What's a meal chit?" "Meals are 3 a day over in the mess." He pointed to a long, low-roofed building across the lawn. "The food isn't bad, so long as you don't think too hard about where it might have come from." I did some quick arithmetic. A talent for 2 months' worth of meals and a dry place to sleep was as good a deal as I could hope for. I smiled at Simon. "Sounds like just the thing." Simon nodded as he opened the door into the Mews. "Bunks it is, then. Come on, let's find a steward and get you signed up." The bunks for non-Arcanum students were on the 4th floor of the east wing of Mews, farthest from the bathing facilities on the ground floor. The accommodations were as Sim had described, nothing fancy, but the narrow bed had clean sheets, and there was a trunk with a lock where I could keep my meagre possessions. All the lower bunks had already been claimed, so I took an upper one in the far corner of the room. As I looked out of one of the narrow windows from on top of my bunk, I was reminded of my secret place high on Tarbean's rooftops. The similarity was oddly comforting. Lunch was a bowl of steaming hot potato soup, beans, narrow rashers of fatty bacon, and fresh brown bread. The room's large plank tables were nearly half full, seating about 200 students. The room was full of the low murmur of conversation, punctuated by laughter, and the metallic sound of spoons and forks scraping against the tin trays. Simon steered me to the back corner of the long room. 2 other students looked up as we approached. Simon made a one-handed gesture to me as he set down his tray. "Everyone, meet Quoth, our newest dewy-eyed first-termer." He gestured from one person to the next. "Quoth, these are the worst students the Arcanum has to offer, Manet and Willem." "Already met him," Willem said. He was the dark-haired Keeldim from the archives. "You really were headed to admissions?" he said, mildly surprised. "I thought you were dealing me false iron." He reached out his hand for me to shake. "Welcome."
"Telu, anyway,"
Manet muttered, looking me over. He was at least 50 years old, with wild hair and a grizzled beard. He wore a slightly dishevelled look, as if he'd only woken up a few minutes ago.
"Am I as old as I feel, or is he as young as he looks?"
"Both,"
Simon said cheerfully as he sat down. "Quoth, Manet here has been in the Arcanum for longer than all of us put together." Manet snorted.
"Give me some credit. I've been in the Arcanum longer than any of you have been alive."
"And still a lolilia," Willem said. His thick Siaru accent made it hard to tell if he was being sarcastic or not.
"Huzzah to being an Alia,"
Manet said earnestly.
"You boys will regret it if you move any farther up the ranks, trust me. It's just more hassle and higher tuitions."
"We want our guilders, Manet," Simon said. "Preferably sometime before we're dead."
"The Gilder is overrated too,"
Manet said, tearing off a piece of bread and dunking it in his soup. The exchange had an easy feel, and I guessed this was a familiar conversation.
"How'd you do?"
Simon asked Willem eagerly. 7 and 8, Willem grumbled. Simon looked surprised.
"What in God's name happened? Did you punch one of them?"
"Fumbled my cipher,"
Willem said sullenly.
"and Lauren asked about the influence of sub-infudation on Modigan currency. Kelvin had to translate. Even then I could not answer."
"Ah, my soul weeps for you," Sim said lightly. "You trounced me these last 2 terms. I was bound to catch a break sooner or later. I got 5 talents even this term."
He held out his hand.
"Pay up."
Willem dug into his pocket and handed Sim a copper jot. I looked at Manet. "Aren't you in on it?" The wild-haired man huffed a laugh and shook his head.
"Ha! There'll be some long odds against me,"
he said, his mouth half full.
"Let's hear it,"
Simon said with a sigh.
"How much this term?"
1 and 6,
Manet said, grinning like a wolf. Before anyone could think to ask me what my tuition was, I spoke up.
"I heard about someone getting a 30-talent tuition. Do they usually get that high?"
"Not if you have the good sense to stay low in the rankings,"
Manet grumbled.
"Only nobility?" Willem said. "Cramelish bastards with no business having their study here. I think they stoke up high tuitions just so they can complain."
"I don't mind," Manet said. "Take their money, keep my tuition low."
I jumped as a tray clattered down onto the other side of the table.
"I assume you're talking about me."
The owner of the tray was blue-eyed and handsome, with a carefully trimmed beard and high Modigan cheekbones. He was dressed in rich, muted colours. On his hip was a knife with a worked wire hilt, the first weapon I'd seen anyone wearing at the university.
"Savoy."
Simon looked stunned.
"What are you doing here?"
"I ask myself the same thing."
Savoy looked down at the bench.
"Are there no proper chairs in this place?"
He took his seat, moving with an odd combination of graceful courtliness and stiff, affronted dignity.
"Excellent. Next I'll be eating with a trencher and throwing bones to the dogs over my shoulder."
"Etiquette dictates it be the left shoulder, your highness,"
Manet said around a mouthful of bread, grinning. Savoy's eyes flashed angry, but before he could say anything, Simon spoke up.
"What happened?"
"My tuition was 68 Strelaum," he said indignantly.
Simon looked nonplussed. "Is that a lot?"
"It is."
"A lot," Savoy said sarcastically.
"And for no good reason. I answered their questions. This is a grudge, plain and simple. Mandrag does not like me. Neither does Hemme. Besides, everyone knows they squeeze the nobility twice as hard as you lot, bleeding us dry as stones.
Simon's nobility? Manette pointed a spoon. He seems to do fine for himself.
Savoy exhaled sharply through his nose.
Simon's father is a paper duke bowing to a tin king in Artois. My father's stables have longer bloodlines than half you are Turan nobles.
Simon stiffened slightly in his seat, though he didn't look up from his meal. Willem turned to face Savoy, his dark eyes going hard. But before he could say anything, Savoy slumped, rubbing his face in one hand.
I'm sorry, Sim. My house and name to you. It's just, things were going to be better this term, but now they're worse instead. My allowance wouldn't even cover my tuition, and no one will extend me more credit. Do you know how humiliating that is? I've had to give up my rooms at the Golden Pony. I'm on the 3rd floor of Mews. I almost had to share a room. What would my father say if he knew?
Simon, his mouth full, shrugged and made a gesture with his spoon that seemed to indicate that there was no offence taken.
Maybe things would go better for you if you didn't go in there looking like a peacock, Manette said. Leave off the silk when you go through admissions.
Is that how it is?
Savoy said, his temper flaring again.
Should I abase myself, rub ashes in my hair, tear my clothes?
As he grew angrier, his lilting accent became more pronounced.
No, they are none of them better men than me. I need not bow to them.
There was a moment of uncomfortable silence at the table. I noticed more than a few of the surrounding students were watching the show from the nearby tables.
Hilta Tiam, Savoy continued. There is nothing in this place I do not hate. Your weather is wild and uncivilized, your religion barbaric and prudish, your whores are intolerably ignorant and unmannerly, your language barely has the subtlety to express how wretched this place is.
Savoy's voice grew softer the longer he spoke, until he almost seemed to be speaking to himself.
My blood goes back 50 generations, older than tree or stone, and I am come to this.
He put his head against the palms of his hands and looked down at his tin tray.
Barley bread! Gods all around us! A man is meant to eat wheat!
I watched him while chewing a mouthful of the fresh brown bread. It tasted wonderful.
I don't know what I was thinking,
Savoy said suddenly, getting to his feet.
I can't deal with this.
He stormed off, leaving his tray on the table. That's Savoy, Manette said to me in an offhand manner. Not a bad sort, though he's usually not nearly as drunk as that. He's Modigan. Simon laughed.
You don't get more Modigan than Savoy. You should not prod at him,
Willem said to Manette. His rough accent made it hard for me to tell if he was rebuking the older student, but his dark, kildish face showed definite reproach. As a foreigner, I guess he sympathized with Savoy's difficulty adjusting to the language and culture of the Commonwealth. He is having a rough time of it, Simon admitted. Remember when he had to let his manservant go? Mouth full, Manette made a gesture with both hands as if playing an imaginary violin. He rolled his eyes, his expression vastly unsympathetic.
He had to sell his rings this time around, I added.
Willem, Simon, and Manette turned to look at me curiously.
There were pale lines on his fingers,
I explained, holding up my hand to demonstrate. Manette gave me a close looking over.
Well now, our new student seems to be all manner of clever.
He turned to Willem and Simon.
Lads, I'm in a betting mood. I'll wager 2 jots that our young Quoth makes it into the Arcanum before the end of his 3rd term.
3 terms, I said, surprised. They told me all I had to do was prove I mastered the basic principles of sympathy.
Manette gave me a gentle smile.
They tell everyone that. Principles of sympathy is one of the classes you'll have to slog through before they elevate you to Elir.
He turned back to Will and Sim expectantly.
How about it? 2 jots?
I'll bet.
Willem gave me a small apologetic shrug.
No offence, I play the odds.
What'll you be studying then? Manet asked as they shook on it. The question caught me off guard.
Everything, I guess.
You sound like me 30 years ago, Manet chuckled. Where are you going to start?
The Chandrian, I said. I'd like to know as much about them as possible.
Manet frowned, then burst out laughing. Well, that's fine and good, I suppose. Simir studies fairies and pixies. Will there believes in all manner of silly damn kildish sky spirits and such. He puffed himself up absurdly. I'm big on imps and shamblemen myself. I felt my face get hot with embarrassment.
God's body, Manet, Sim cut him off. What has got into you?
I just bet 2 jots on a boy who wants to study bedtime stories, Manet groused, gesturing to me with his fork.
He meant folklore, that sort of thing.
Willem turned to look at me.
You're looking to work in the archives?
Folklore's a piece of it, I hedged quickly, eager to save face. I want to see if different cultures' folk tales conform to Teckham's theory of narrative septuagy. Sim turned back to Manet.
See? Why are you so twitchy today? When's the last time you slept?
Don't take that tone with me, Manet grumbled. I caught a few hours last night.
And which night was that?
Sim pressed. Manet paused, looking down at his tray. Felling night? Willem shook his head, muttering something in Siaru. Simon looked horrified.
Manet, yesterday was Kendling. Has it been 2 days since you've slept?
Probably not, Manet said uncertainly. I always lose track of things during admissions. There aren't any classes. It throws off my schedule. Besides, I've been caught up in a project in the fishery. He trailed off, scrubbing at his face with his hands, then looked up at me. They're right. I'm a little off my head right now. Tecum septuagy, folklore and all that. It's a bit bookish for me, but a fine thing to study. I didn't mean any offence.
None taken,
I said easily, and nodded at Savoy's tray. Slide that over here, would you? If your young noble's not coming back, I'll have his bread.